I still remember the weight of that bottle in my hands. It was a deep burgundy wine, aged 20 years, the kind of bottle my mother used to say only real ladies could appreciate. I thought she'd be proud to see me bringing one. Proud to see her daughter, the one who built everything she said I never could, standing at her doorstep again. Not as a failure but as family. The sun had barely set over the hills when I parked my car outside her house. The sky burned gold, then turned to that soft purple that always made me think of forgiveness. My fingers trembled around the neck of the bottle as I stepped out, heels crunching against the gravel driveway. The house looked the same as it always had. Polished, perfect, silent. It had been a year since I last walked this path. A year since our last conversation. A phone call that ended with my mother saying, "You've changed, and not in a good way." I never told her that I cried afterward. I never told her that I built everything I did, not for money, but for that one sentence I'd been waiting my whole life to hear from her. "I'm proud of you." Tonight I thought maybe I'd finally hear it. I had it all planned. Dinner reservations, a surprise cake delivery, even a necklace I'd designed myself, engraved with her initials. I just wanted us to be a family again. I wanted to believe success hadn't turned us into strangers. But when I reached the door, the warmth I imagined never came. I rang the bell once. The chime echoed inside, laughter followed. A woman's voice, my sister's, and the deep rumble of my brother's laugh. For a moment I smiled. Maybe they were already here, celebrating. Maybe this would be one of those nights you look back on and say, "We finally fixed it." Then the door opened. My mother stood there, framed in the doorway's soft yellow light. She looked smaller than I remembered, older too, but her eyes still had that sharp, glassy coldness that could cut through any room. She didn't move, didn't smile. "Mom," I breathed, stepping forward. "Happy birthday." Her gaze dropped to the bottle in my hand. For a long, awkward second, she just stared, as if it were an insult, not a gift. Then her voice, flat, clipped, cruelly calm. "Leave, you lowlife," froze. I thought I'd misheard. The words hung in the air like frost, refusing to melt. What?" I whispered. "You heard me," she said, crossing her arms. "You think money makes you one of us now. You're not welcome here." Behind her I saw them, my siblings. My brother, in his designer sweater, trying not to meet my eyes. My sister, sipping wine, a smirk hiding behind her glass. And then the laughter. Small at first, then louder. A chorus of smug, muffled amusement that hit harder than any slap could. I tried to speak, to explain, to ask why. But no words came. The bottle slipped from my fingers, shattering against the stone porch. Red wine spread across the ground like spilled blood, soaking into the cracks. No one moved to help. My mother's lips curled. "You may have money, but you'll never have class," she said softly, the same way she used to say good night when I was little. And then she shut the door. The world went quiet. For a few seconds I stood there, listening to the faint sound of laughter echoing from inside, the clinking of glasses, the music playing softly. My hands were trembling. My throat burned. I didn't cry, not yet. I just turned and walked back down the driveway, heels cracking against the stone, each step heavier than the last. The cold night air bit my skin, but it wasn't as cold as what I felt inside. When I reached my car, I leaned against the door and finally let my tears fall. But I made no sound. I'd spent years teaching myself to be silent, to be strong, to prove that I could take anything life threw at me. But this was different. This was rejection not from strangers, but from blood. From the very people I built my empire to protect. I looked up at the house one last time. The curtains were drawn, the lights were warm, and laughter still floated through the windows. They didn't even notice I was gone. I got into my car and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, replaying every memory of my mother's voice telling me to keep working harder. Be better. Prove yourself. Well, I had. I built a company from nothing. One that employed hundreds, changed lives, and gave me everything I'd ever dreamed of. But apparently that wasn't enough. Maybe it never would be. The drive home was a blur. City lights fading into streaks of gold and white through the tears I refused to wipe away. By the time I reached my penthouse, the city was asleep. I stood by the window, staring at the skyline I'd once sworn I'd conquer. I had everything: success, wealth, recognition. But that night I felt like the poorest woman alive. And yet, something in me began to shift. Somewhere between heartbreak and exhaustion, a quiet realization started to bloom. The kind that comes when you finally run out of tears. If I could build everything from nothing once, I could start again. But this time I'd build something they could never take: peace. I poured myself a glass of water, turned off the lights, and whispered into the silence. You called me a lowlife. Maybe I am. Because I'm done living for you. I didn't know it then, but that night, the night I walked away from my mother's door, was the night my real life began. And soon, they'd all learn exactly what lowlife was capable of. When people looked at me, they saw success. The fancy office, the chauffeur, the tailored suits that fit like armor. But behind every polished surface was a story that none of them, especially my family, ever cared to know. They never saw the girl who used to sleep on the floor of a freezing apartment, clutching a calculator instead of a teddy bear, whispering to herself that one day she'd make enough money to never be cold again. They never saw the burns on my hands from double shifts at the diner, the blisters from unloading boxes at the grocery store, or the nights I fell asleep on my desk at community college, too tired to dream. Back then my parents said I was wasting my time. Women don't build companies, my father once told me, shaking his head over dinner. They marry into them. My mother had laughed softly, slicing her roast. Sweetheart, she said, ambition doesn't suit you. It's unbecoming. But ambition was all I had. When you're told you'll never be enough, something happens inside you. It's like a match strikes deep in your chest. Doesn't burn out. It becomes your heartbeat. So, while they attended family parties and gossiped about who bought a bigger house, I was working, pouring coffee at 6 a.m., taking business classes at night, sketching out ideas for a logistics software company on napkins during lunch breaks. It started small. A simple system for tracking local delivery routes more efficiently. But small ideas can grow like wildfire when fueled by desperation. By 30, I had my first warehouse. By 40, I had my first million. And by 50? Well, by 50, I was sitting in a glass office overlooking downtown Phoenix, watching my company's logo light up the skyline. I remember the first time my parents visited that office. My mother looked around the lobby, her heels clicking against the marble. Her expression somewhere between disbelief and envy. "This is yours?" she asked, touching the glass table like it might shatter. "Yes," I said simply, trying not to sound proud. "Ours if you think about it. You inspired me." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. My father just nodded and muttered, "You finally got lucky." Lucky. As if luck had anything to do with the blood, sweat, and broken nights I poured into building what I had. Still, I kept trying to earn their love. I bought them gifts, paid off their debts, took them to dinners they couldn't afford. I even bought them a summer home in Sedona, thinking maybe comfort would thaw the ice in their hearts. But love, I learned, isn't something you can buy. And respect. That's something some people will never give. Not because you haven't earned it, but because it reminds them of everything they'll never be. The more successful I became, the colder they got. Family dinners turned into interrogations. "Who are you seeing these days?" my mother would ask, her tone sweet but sharp. "Still no husband. Still no real family." "Work keeps me busy," I'd reply quietly. She'd smile, that pitying smile, the kind that cuts more than it comforts. "Money can't keep you warm at night, dear," she'd say. You'll see. Maybe she was right. Maybe money couldn't keep me warm. But it did build walls high enough to keep their cruelty out. Still, a part of me, the child in me, kept hoping. Hoping that one day she'd call and say, "I'm proud of you, honey." I was wrong. That day never came. Instead, what came were phone calls only when they needed something. Loan here. Favor there. A new car for my brother's wife. "Oh, you can afford it," they'd say with a laugh. "It's just a drop in the bucket for you." First I said yes. Always yes. Because family meant everything. But then came the day I said no. It was 2 years ago. My mother wanted a new investment property. I told her gently that it wasn't a good time, that I'd already given too much, that I needed to step back and focus on my own stability. Her response: cold. Immediate. So the rumors are true, she said. You've become greedy. Greedy. That word haunted me for weeks. I wasn't greedy. I was tired. Tired of giving everything, time, money, energy, and still being treated like an outsider in my own family. That was when the silence began. No calls. No invitations. No birthdays, no Christmas, no Thanksgiving. Just quiet. I filled the silence with work, with success, with noise that didn't hurt as much. But even in the loudest boardroom, even in the most crowded gala, that quiet voice in my heart kept whispering, they don't love you. They just love what you give them. So, when I showed up at their door that night with a wine bottle and a trembling smile, it wasn't out of pride. It was out of hope. Hope that maybe this time I'd be welcomed not as the bank, not as the disappointment, but as the daughter they once tucked into bed and kissed goodnight. But the truth is, that version of family was gone long before I arrived. What I didn't know, standing on that porch, was that they'd already been planning something crueler than rejection. Because while I was trying to make peace, they were making plans. Plans that involved my name, my company, and every dollar I had ever earned. And when I found out, let's just say, the woman they once called lowlife would soon show them exactly how dangerous kindness can be when it's betrayed. I still remember that night vividly. The same night my mother called me a lowlife. It wasn't the insult that broke me. It was the way she said it. Not in anger, but in satisfaction. Like she had been waiting years to say those words out loud. I left her doorstep in silence, the cold wind biting at my face, my breath fogging in the November air. The pie I'd brought slipped from my trembling hands, splattering across the porch like some ugly metaphor for everything I'd tried to hold together. I didn't cry, not then. I just stood there, numb, staring at that shattered pie dish. Because deep down I realized something. Love doesn't just die. It's killed. Slowly. Intentionally. And that night, my family made sure I understood exactly where I stood in theirs. When I got home, I tried to shake it off. I told myself, it's fine, they're just upset. Maybe they misunderstood. But then the phone rang. It was my assistant, Marissa. Her voice nervous, trembling slightly. Ma'am, there's something you should know. I didn't want to call you tonight, but I just got an alert from the finance team. My heart sank. What kind of alert? She hesitated. It's unusual activity. In the trust accounts. The ones tied to your family. I frowned. That's impossible. I haven't touched those accounts in months. I know, she said softly. But someone else did. The next morning I went straight to my office. The city was still waking up, soft sunrise light spilling through the windows of the high-rises. But inside my office it felt like midnight. Stacks of reports sat waiting on my desk. Bank statements, transfer logs, legal documents. Each one felt like a dagger. And there it was, my mother's signature. My brother's initials. They had been quietly moving assets, selling shares, shifting property titles into their own names. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, calculated, deliberate, and cruel. The realization hit like a punch. All those family dinners, all those let's discuss business over wine nights, they weren't bonding moments. They were strategy meetings. And I was the target. They wanted control of everything I'd built. My $60 million company. My investments. Even the vacation homes. Piece by piece, they were trying to take it all, under the guise of family management. And the worst part, I had trusted them. I had signed papers without reading, handed over power of attorney for temporary transactions, and let my brother's lawyer friend handle updates to my estate. Because who suspects betrayal from the people who raised you? I sat in my office for hours that day, staring at those documents. The silence was deafening. Then a knock on the door. It was my accountant, Samuel, a kind, gray-haired man who'd worked with me for 20 years. He walked in slowly, carrying a folder. His face looked older than usual. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you need to see this." He opened the folder. Inside was a letter, unsigned but unmistakable. A draft of a legal agreement that would transfer 70% ownership of my company to a family holding trust. The trustee. My mother. My hand shook as I held it. "When was this drawn up?" "2 weeks ago," Samuel said. "And from what I can tell, they've already started executing the first steps." I stared at the paper, the lines blurring through my tears. 2 weeks ago. That was right around the time they stopped talking to me. Right before Thanksgiving. It wasn't silence out of anger. It was silence out of victory. They thought they had already won. That night I drove aimlessly. Past the city, past the noise, past the bright lights that had once symbolized success. I ended up at my old house, the one I grew up in long before any of this. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint chipped, the windows fogged with age. But as I stood there in the dark, something inside me broke, not from sadness but from clarity. I realized I had been living my entire life in search of approval from people who didn't even want me to succeed. Every dollar I earned, every deal I closed, every award I won, I had subconsciously hoped it would make them proud. But pride was never in their vocabulary. Control was. And now they had gone too far. That night, sitting in my car outside that old house, I made a decision. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. They had built their plan carefully. But they made one mistake. They underestimated the woman they'd tried to destroy. The next morning I called my lawyer, the one they didn't know about. A quiet, sharp woman named Denise who'd once handled my acquisitions. I told her everything. Every signature, every document, every detail I'd found. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she simply said, "All right. Let's teach them how corporate warfare really works." For the next 2 weeks, we worked in silence. Late nights, locked doors, paper trails that would make even the IRS sweat. Denise uncovered everything. False accounts, fraudulent signatures, misused funds. She even found a clause in the trust proposal that could send them straight to prison for financial manipulation. But instead of pressing charges immediately, I wanted something better. I wanted them to expose themselves. So, I invited my parents and brother to lunch. At their favorite country club, of course, the one my membership still paid for. When they arrived, they were all smiles. My mother in pearls, my brother in his designer suit. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said, air-kissing me. "We're so glad you wanted to meet. Family should never stay angry for long." I smiled faintly. "I agree." I thought it was time to settle things. We ordered lunch. The waiter poured wine. They talked about the weather, about golf, about anything but the elephant in the room. And then I slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" my brother asked, opening it. He froze. Inside were copies of every document they had forged, with signatures highlighted, timestamps printed, and Denise's legal report neatly attached. My mother's face turned pale. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. I said quietly, "you'd want to see how your little plan looks from a legal standpoint." My mother tried to speak. "This isn't." "It is," I interrupted. My voice didn't shake. "And if you'd like, I can have the Arizona State Attorney's Office confirm that by morning." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I leaned back, folded my hands, and looked at them the way I might look at a hostile investor. Calm, unflinching. "I built everything you see here. Every dollar, every building, every piece of our so-called family wealth. And you tried to take it." My brother swallowed hard. "We were just saving me from myself." Cut in. "Or saving yourselves from having to admit you'll never stand on your own 2 feet. My mother slammed her hand on the table. "You ungrateful. Ungrateful," I whispered. "You called me a lowlife. You locked me out of Thanksgiving. You stole from me. And still you think I owe you something." Her lips trembled. She looked down. For the first time in my life, she had no words. I stood up. "I'm not pressing charges," I said simply. "Not yet." They looked up shocked. "But," I continued, "from this moment on, you are cut off. Completely. The properties you live in, owned by my company. The cars, leased under my name. The accounts, funded through my business holdings." I pulled out a small envelope and placed it on the table. "Inside are your notices of eviction and account closure." My mother gasped. My brother's face turned red. I smiled faintly. "You wanted to control my life. Now you can control how quickly you pack." And with that I walked out. That night I didn't feel triumphant. Felt quiet. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a whisper that says, "You finally stood up for yourself." The next morning I moved to a smaller house by the coast. No luxury, no servants, no noise. Just me, my coffee, and peace. People thought I was crazy to leave the mansion, the city, the empire. But I'd already learned the truth. There's no point living in a palace if you have to share it with snakes. So when people ask me now, "Don't you miss them? Don't you regret what you did?" I just smile and say, "Regret? Well, I finally stopped begging for love from people who never knew what it meant. And if I could tell that lonely little girl, the one who once believed love could be bought, anything, I'd tell her this. You were never a lowlife. You were the light they couldn't stand to see shining brighter than their own." The waves outside my little coastal home roll like slow heartbeats. Steady, calm, alive. I often sit by the window in the mornings, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands, watching sunlight dance on the water. It's been months since that day. The day I walked away from my family, from the betrayal, from the noise. And for the first time in my life, I finally understand what peace feels like. Not the kind that's quiet because everyone's pretending to get along. No, this is the kind of peace that comes when you stop explaining yourself to people determined not to understand you. I traded mansions for mornings like this. Simple, warm, and real. When I left the city, I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I packed 2 suitcases, locked my phone in a drawer, and drove until the noise faded into ocean breeze. The house I found isn't much. 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, paint that smells like salt and sunlight. But it's mine. And every corner of it holds something I'd been missing for years. Honesty. There's no staff waiting for orders, no cameras flashing when I step outside. No family keeping score of who owes what. Just me, a few seagulls, and the sound of the tide reminding me that everything broken can be washed clean, given enough time. At first I thought I'd feel lonely. You don't walk away from blood without feeling a certain emptiness. But it wasn't loneliness I felt, it was detox. Like my heart was finally clearing out years of poison I didn't realize I'd been breathing. I started small. Cooking for one. Reading books I'd never had time for. Taking walks down the shore barefoot. Letting the waves kiss my ankles like they were saying, "Welcome back to yourself." I'd stop by the local farmer's market on Saturdays. The kind of place where everyone knows your name after 2 visits. There was an old man there, Mr. Hargrove, who sold honey and always said, "Sunlight fixes most things, sweetheart." He was right. Because every day I sat in that sunlight, I realized something new about myself. About the woman I had become in spite of everything that tried to break her. One morning I found an old photo album buried in one of my boxes. Pictures from years ago. There I was, smiling beside my parents, holding my baby brother on my hip. We looked happy. But I could see it now, the cracks I used to ignore. My mother's forced smile. My father's distant eyes. The way my brother always stood a few steps ahead, even then. It hit me that I'd been chasing a version of family that never really existed. And once that truth settled in, something inside me let go. You see, healing isn't about revenge. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about releasing the grip they still have on your peace, even when they're miles away. I had spent decades trying to earn my family's love with success. But love that needs to be earned isn't love, it's leverage. And once you realize that, their power over you crumbles. Weeks later I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a short note. We didn't know what we had until you were gone. The house feels empty. Mom hasn't spoken to anyone. Please call us. It was from my brother. For a moment I felt that old ache, the temptation to forgive too fast, to forget what happened just because the silence felt heavy. But then I remembered that peace and access are not the same thing. Forgiveness doesn't mean opening the door again to people who burned your house down. It means wishing them well, from a distance that protects your heart. So I didn't call. I simply wrote back one sentence. I hope you find the peace I found when I finally stopped chasing yours. And that was enough. There's a saying I once heard from an old friend. When you finally learn your worth, you stop giving discounts. That line stayed with me. Because for too long I had discounted my time, my love, my sanity, all to make others comfortable. I had dimmed my light so no one else felt overshadowed. But the truth is, God doesn't give light so you can hide it. He gives it so you can see your own way forward, even if it blinds the ones still stuck in the dark. And the older I get, the more I realize, protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's sacred. A few weeks ago, I was walking down the beach when a young woman stopped me. She looked nervous, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you the lady from the news?" I blinked. "I don't think so, dear." She smiled shyly. "No, I mean you used to run that big tech company, right? My dad always talked about you. Said you built it from nothing." I laughed. "Well, yes, that sounds like me." Her smile faded. "I just wanted to say, my family doesn't talk to me anymore either. They think I'm a failure because I didn't take the job they wanted. I don't know what to do." I looked at her, saw the same fear I used to carry. So I told her what I wish someone had told me years ago. Sometimes the family you're born into can't see your worth because your growth reminds them of everything they never became. But that's not your fault. Keep growing anyway. She started crying. I hugged her right there on the sand, because I knew exactly what it felt like to be unloved by the people who should have loved you first. That night I came home and wrote in my journal. Not about the pain. Not about the betrayal. But about gratitude. Gratitude that I survived long enough to learn what love truly means. It's not gifts or praise or approval. It's quiet loyalty. It's honesty when no one's watching. It's showing up even when it's inconvenient. And sometimes the greatest love story you'll ever live is the one where you finally love yourself enough to walk away. People often ask me if I'll ever reconcile with my family. And maybe one day I will. Not because I owe them, but because I've healed enough to no longer fear them. But if that day never comes, I'm okay with that too. Because forgiveness is freedom. And peace. Peace is a choice I make every single morning when the sun rises over the waves. I still wake up sometimes thinking about that day. Standing on their porch, holding that pie, hearing my own mother call me lowlife. But now, when I think of it, I don't feel pain. Feel clarity. Because that was the moment I stopped being their daughter and started being my own woman. Now, when I see the tide pull back before another wave, I smile. Because I know. Sometimes life pulls things away from you not to punish you but to prepare you. And when the next wave comes, it brings back everything meant for you. Real love. Real peace. Real purpose. The kind that doesn't vanish when the money runs out or when you say, no. The kind that stays because it's built on truth. So, to anyone listening, to anyone who's ever been called names by the people who should have protected you, listen closely. You are not what they said you are. You are not ungrateful. You are not a disappointment. You are not a lowlife. You are proof that love doesn't die. It just learns how to bloom somewhere safer. And when they finally realize what they lost, you'll be too busy living your peace to notice. They thought calling me worthless would break me. But what they didn't realize was that worth doesn't come from family approval. It comes from surviving them. And I smile now, every morning, watching the sunlight touch the sea. Because I know, deep down, I never needed their love to feel whole. I just needed my own.